My sister looked me up and down, a cruel smirk playing on her lips before asking, "Still single?" LOL. My ex-husband didn't even hide his sneer as he chimed in, "Hey, ugly. Still the same?" They thought they were entering my parents' home as victorious royalty, ready to humiliate me 3 years after destroying my life. My heart hammered against my ribs. But before I could utter a single word, my dad slowly stood up from the head of the dining table. The entire room fell dead silent. He cleared his throat, looked both of them dead in the eye, and said, "Good timing. I actually have something very important to tell you." In an instant, the smirks wiped off their faces, and their expressions turned entirely pale. They had no idea that the trap had already been sprung. Follow my story until the end to see how the tables turned, and comment the city you're watching from so I can see how far my story has reached. My name is Emily Carter, and at 34 years old, I spent 3 long years living in the shadow of a betrayal so deep it almost erased me. 3 years ago, my world shattered into a million sharp edges. I walked into my own home early from a business trip, carrying takeout for what I thought would be a quiet Friday night with my husband, Mark. Instead, I found him in our master bedroom with my younger sister, Vanessa. There were no tears from them, no stammers of panic, just cold, calculating indifference. Within 48 hours, Mark filed for divorce, clearing out our joint savings to fund a lavish getaway with Vanessa. They didn't just break my heart, they took delight in running off together, posting their tropical vacations online for the entire family to see. Vanessa sent me a text right before she blocked me, reading, "Some women just know how to keep a man, Emily. Don't take it personally." I was left with an empty house, a crushed spirit, and a mountain of legal bills. Everyone expected me to crumble. For months, I barely spoke, retreating into the quiet sanctuary of my parents' home. But while the world thought I was nursing my wounds in silence, my father and I were silently laying the foundation for something else entirely. I spent those 3 years rebuilding my life from the ashes, brick by brick, waiting for the day the smoke would finally clear. I stopped looking in the mirror with self-doubt and started channeling every ounce of my heartbreak into sharpening my mind, taking over corporate management tasks, and learning how to protect what mattered most. I knew that crying wouldn't bring justice, and screaming wouldn't fix my broken accounts. Only cold, hard preparation could do that. My father watched my quiet transformation every single day, his eyes burning with a mixture of sorrow for what I had endured and fierce pride for the fierce executive I was becoming under the radar. We didn't share our plans with anyone, not even my mother, who was still fragile from the family fracture. We kept our cards close to our chests, letting Mark and Vanessa believe they had won absolute freedom and total victory. Little did they know, their temporary celebration was merely the prelude to a permanent downfall. The call came on a brisk Tuesday afternoon. My mother's voice was hesitant over the speakerphone, carrying a heavy weight she didn't want to drop on me. "Emily, sweetie, Vanessa called your father," she said softly. "She and Mark are back in town. They want to come over for Sunday dinner." She said it was time to extend an olive branch and catch up with the family. An olive branch! The sheer audacity of it made my blood run cold. After 3 years of complete radio silence following the theft of my husband and their public mockery, she wanted to stroll back into our lives as if she'd simply been away on a long vacation. My initial reaction was pure refusal. I told my dad I would pack my things and stay at a hotel for the weekend. I had no desire to sit across a dining table and pretend that 3 years of pain could be wiped clean over pot roast and wine. But my father placed a steady hand on my shoulder, his eyes holding a sharp, knowing calm that instantly quieted my panic. "No, Emily," he said, his voice quiet, but as solid as iron. "You stay right here. You've hidden your strength long enough, honey. It's time they see exactly who you've become." So I stayed. And when Sunday evening arrived, standing by the living room window, I watched as a slick late-model luxury car pulled into our driveway, signaling that the storm had finally arrived. The front door swung open, and in walked Vanessa and Mark, exuding an air of insufferable arrogance. Vanessa stepped into the foyer wearing a designer dress that screamed money, her wrist dripping with diamond bracelets. Mark followed right behind her, strutting into my parents' home with his hands in his tailored trousers, looking around as if he owned the place. They didn't look remorseful. They looked like conquerors returning to inspect their kingdom. The moment Vanessa's eyes landed on me standing near the kitchen counter, her face contorted into a smug, mocking
grin.
She didn't offer a hug or even a polite hello. Instead, she took a deliberate step closer, looked me up and down with slow, judgmental eyes, and sneered. Still single? LOL. Before the sting of her words could even settle, Mark let out a harsh, barking laugh. He shook his head, looking at me with total contempt. Hey, ugly. Still the same, he chimed in, leaning against the archway. I see you haven't upgraded your wardrobe or your life since I left. I felt my heart hammer against my ribs, the sheer cruelty of their words echoing through the hallway. They had spent 3 years living off their stolen thrill, and they expected me to cower just like I used to. My mother froze, her face turning pale with shock. But my father, who was sitting quietly at the head of the dining room table, didn't flinch. He just watched them, his expression completely unreadable. The heavy silence in the room stretched thin, thick with the poisonous arrogance Mark and Vanessa had brought through the front door. They stood there smirking at each other, convinced that their cheap insults had reduced me back into the broken woman who had wept 3 years ago. They had come here tonight expecting a victory lap, expecting to flex their newfound wealth and subtly probe my parents about the family trust they assumed was waiting for them. Then my dad slowly stood up from the head of the dining table. He didn't raise his voice, nor did he display a single flicker of anger. He simply scraped his chair back against the hardwood floor, the harsh sound cutting through the air like a knife. The entire room fell dead silent. He straightened his tie, looked both of them dead in the eye, and said, "Good timing. I actually have something very important to tell you." In an instant, the smirks wiped clean off their faces. Vanessa blinked, her smug expression melting into a look of uneasy confusion, while Mark pulled his hands out of his pockets, suddenly shifting his weight from foot to foot. "You both came into my house bragging about your success, strutting around like you've conquered the world." My father continued, his voice echoing off the walls with steady authority. "You think you're standing at the top, looking down on Emily, but you've made a fatal mistake. You assumed that while you were away playing house on stolen money, time stood still here. You assumed the family business and everything attached to it was still waiting for your return." My dad paused, reaching into his jacket pocket, his eyes never leaving Mark's rapidly pale face. My father pulled a thick manila folder from his jacket and laid it flat on the dining table. The heavy thump of the papers echoed through the quiet room. "3 years ago, when you two decided to destroy this family for your own selfish desires, you thought you left Emily with nothing," my dad said, his voice dropping to a low, powerful register. "You thought she was weak. You thought she would spend her life wallowing in the dust you left behind. But while you were busy throwing away your morality, Emily was working." Mark's eyebrows pulled together in a tight scowl. "What are you talking about?" "She was sitting here feeling sorry for herself." "No, Mark," my dad countered sharply. "She was saving this family's future. 2 years ago, I officially stepped down from the family company. I didn't hand the reins over to a board, and I certainly didn't leave a single share for you, Vanessa." Vanessa's jaw dropped, her diamond-encrusted wrist freezing midair. "Dad, what do you mean?" "I mean that Emily is the sole CEO and majority owner of Carter Enterprises," my father declared, tapping the documents on the table. "Every asset, every commercial property, and every patent this family built over 30 years was legally transferred into her name. She isn't living off my goodwill. She runs the entire empire and this house. The deed was transferred to Emily 6 months ago. You are standing in her living room, eating off her table." Vanessa gasped, clutching her designer purse tightly against her chest, as if it could somehow protect her from the sudden shift in reality. Mark's face drained of every last drop of color. The arrogant man who had walked into the foyer, treating me like an eyesore, was suddenly looking at the woman who held complete financial control over everything his greedy eyes had ever coveted. My father looked at them both, with cold finality. "You didn't come back to extend an olive branch. You came back to leech off what you thought was coming to you, but as of this exact moment, you are officially written out of the family trust entirely. The silence that followed was suffocating. The air left Mark's lungs in a sharp, ragged gasp as the blood completely drained from his face. Emily, CEO? Mark stammered, his eyes darting wildly between my father and me.